From the world's most volatile region, conflicts over faith and boundaries. Stories of death, destruction, despair, and hope. WION brings you to the heart of the action. Incisive analysis, unrivaled perspective, and exclusive ground reports. Watch West Asia Post every Friday, 8:30 p.m. IST with me, Radi Francis. Only on WION, World is One.
Stay connected with the world through WION. Like the page on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter for new alerts. Instagram for videos and images. And the website for the latest news, views, and analysis. WIONews.com. World is One.
This week on World of Africa, it's showtime for Nigeria. As election day nears, we'll look at the numbers of those who make their voices heard at the ballot and the contenders' final pitch to the electorate. Bickering priests and widespread tensions caused by a rift within Ethiopia's Orthodox Christian Church results in the suspension of access to social media platforms including TikTok, Facebook and Telegram. And we may look dandy with our clothes, but don't get us wrong, this is art and not costumes. Sapes call on the Congolese government to recognize their culture. All this and much more at these times only on WION, World is One.
This week on the West Asia Post, a special episode from the heart of Syria. Memories, 10 families home. Stories of despair from the disaster zone. Another building, more than 25 people dead, and the whole street is endangered. Track my journey from Beirut to Damascus, Hama, Aleppo, and Latakia. Unseen and unfiltered. Entire families have been lost. No help, no machinery right here. A look at the lives lost, the widespread devastation, and the reluctance of the West to help Syria. On this episode, we ask one question. welcome. You're watching Pulse on WION with me, Neha Khanna. On the show, we'll get you all the big stories from around the globe. And in just a moment, we will cut across live to US President Joe Biden, who's about to speak in the Polish capital of Warsaw. Before that, let's take a look at the headlines. US President Joe Biden and Polish President Duda reaffirm a non-acceptance of Russia's aggression in Ukraine. All eyes now on Biden's speech ahead of the first anniversary of the Ukraine war. In his State of the Nation address, Russian President Vladimir Putin lashes out at the West and calls off the Russia-US New START treaty, the last remaining nuclear arms control agreement between the two major powers. The world is now a more dangerous place, warns the NATO chief. Reports of a fresh round of massive Russian shelling in Ukraine's Kherson region. Ukraine claims at least 6 people have been killed and dozens of others wounded. Ukraine cites the risk of intensified Russian missile strikes in the run-up to the one-year anniversary of the war. On Friday, educational institutions told to operate remotely. Indian tennis icon Sania Mirza ends her glittering tennis career after a defeat at the Dubai Open. The 36-year-old brings the curtains down on her professional career that saw her win 6 Grand Slam titles. Our top story, as Russian President Vladimir Putin slammed NATO and the West in his State of the Nation address today, US President Joe Biden lauded NATO as the most consequential alliance in the world.
The United States needs Poland and NATO as much as NATO needs the United States, because there is no way in which, for our ability to operate anywhere else in the world and our responsibilities extend beyond Europe, we have to have a security in Europe. It's that basic, that simple, that consequential. So it's the single most consequential alliance, I would argue, maybe the most consequential alliance in history. That not just modern history, but in history.
To Poland, Biden met with President Andrzej Duda in Warsaw. The two leaders discussed collective support for Ukraine. Biden promised to bolster Warsaw's security for generations as he thanked Poland for its support of Ukraine. Polish President Duda said Biden's visit was an important sign of the United States' commitment to maintaining security in Europe.
For all of us, this is an extremely important symbolic visit here in the region. We do not perceive it as Poles as a visit to us. This is a visit to our region. Combined with the visit to Kiev, this is a very strong signal of the responsibility that the US constantly assumes for the security of Europe and the world.
Biden is rallying NATO allies in Poland to demonstrate that the United States is squarely behind Ukraine and is committed to bolstering the alliance's eastern flank. Biden arrived in Warsaw late on Monday following a surprise visit to Kiev. Before returning to Washington on Wednesday, Biden will meet leaders of the Bucharest 9 to reaffirm support for their security. The Bucharest 9 countries are those on NATO's easternmost flank. All right, my colleague Susan Tehrani now joins us live from New York to shed more light on this important visit. Susan, these visits by President Biden are obviously pregnant with significance. First, that surprise visit to Kiev, and now Poland on the eve of the first anniversary of the Ukraine war, and he has reaffirmed the United States' commitment to supporting not only Ukraine but all of America's allies. What can we expect from the speech that President Biden is about to make in Warsaw a short while from now?
Right, Neha, as you mentioned, this is a speech that's going to really focus on trying to garner support for democracy against autocracy. This is the Biden doctrine that has been prevalent really since the beginning of his administration and since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It's something that has garnered support until now. And as we're trying to really understand how President Biden wants to continue to garner this support moving forward 1 year on, as we're seeing some cracks here in the United States regarding that support, notably among the American people, we're expecting once again for President Biden to try to appeal to the American population that this war and this support to the Ukrainians is in the interest of America as well, that democracy prevailing in Ukraine miles away is detrimental to the security of America as well, and pouring in this money into Ukraine ultimately in the long run will be beneficial to the safety and security of the United States. But President Biden will also have another audience, and that will be in Europe. And while he will pat Europeans on the back for their support, and he'll pat himself, of course, on the back for bringing Europe together and NATO allies together in its fight against Russia. One thing is clear: without the United States, other European countries really wouldn't have come together the way that they had in really pushing back against Russia. Although we do know that in the past year, Europe really didn't divorce itself completely from Russia oil, despite the sanctions and whatnot. And then there are other audiences in Ukraine and in Russia as well. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said that this speech is not going to be a rebuke and defensive against Russia, despite the fact that just hours before, Vladimir Putin did make that speech a very stark announcement that Russia was going to pull back from the START arms treaty. Still, President Biden is expected to not really address that on the one hand, and is not going to really address the fact that the U.S. just days before said that it had intelligence that China is planning on providing lethal aid to Russia in its fight against Ukraine. Again, China has pushed back regarding those allegations. So a lot of rubric cubes at play here, but the president really, his main focus is going to really be that democracy has to prevail in Ukraine. And one other thing, despite the fact that many 1 year on are talking about some form of realism moving forward, whether it's ceasefire, some sort of concession in terms of finding a peaceful solution, a negotiated solution where Ukraine can also feel victorious, whether it's, trying to find a way into the European Union, while Russia also has some sort of territory. On the other hand, President Biden is not expected to address any of that as well. He always says and will say, according to National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, that any peace deal about Ukraine is going to be in the hands of the Ukrainians, and Americans are just there to provide support. But I will say that the argument and the sounds are getting louder and louder that the United States and the West has to really have a more realistic approach moving forward regarding this conflict, because, as I mentioned, support for it is waning here in the United States. We're not really talking about it as much, but ultimately, another year of this is going to be very different from the year past, especially if we're talking about Russia coming out of the Nuclear START treaty if China wants to get involved. And then we're talking about, the United States just pouring money and the Pentagon saying that, outright really admitting that its weapons are.
So let's cut across to him.
President Duda, Prime Minister, Mr. Mayor, to all the former ministers and presidents, as well as mayors and Polish political leaders from all across the country, thank you for welcoming back to Poland. It was nearly 1 year ago. I spoke at the Royal Castle here in Warsaw, just weeks after Vladimir Putin had unleashed his murderous assault on Ukraine, the largest land war in Europe since World War II had begun. And the principles that have been the cornerstone of peace, prosperity, and stability on this planet for more than 75 years were at risk of being shattered. 1 year ago, the world was bracing for the fall of Kyiv. Well, I just come from a visit to Kyiv, and I can report Kyiv stands strong. Kyiv stands proud. It stands tall. And most important, it stands free. When Russia invaded, it wasn't just Ukraine being tested. The whole world faced a test for the ages. Europe was being tested. America was being tested. NATO was being tested. All democracies are being tested. And the questions we faced were as simple as they were profound. Would we respond? Or would we look the other way? Would we be strong? Or would we be weak? All of our allies, would be united or divided? 1 year later, we know the answer. We did respond. We would be strong. We would be united. And the world would not look the other way. We also face fundamental questions about the commitment to the most basic of principles. Would we stand up for the sovereignty of nations? Would we stand up for the right of people to live free from naked aggression? Would we stand up for democracy? 1 year later, we know the answers. Yes, we would stand up for sovereignty, and we did. Yes, we would stand up for the right of people to live free from aggression, and we did. And we would stand up for democracy, and we did. And yesterday, I had the honor to stand with President Zelensky in Kyiv to declare that we will keep standing up for these same things, no matter what. When President Putin ordered his tanks to roll into Ukraine, he thought we would roll over. He was wrong. The Ukrainian people are too brave. America, Europe, a coalition of nations from the Atlantic to the Pacific, we were too unified. Democracy was too strong. Instead of an easy victory he perceived and predicted, Putin left with burnout tanks and Russia's forces in disarray. He thought he'd get the Finlandization of NATO. Instead, he got the NATOization of Finland and Sweden. He thought NATO would fracture and divide. Instead, NATO is more united and more unified than ever before. He thought he could weaponize energy to crack Europe's resolve. Instead, we're working together to end Europe's dependence on Russian fossil fuels. He thought autocrats like himself were tough and leaders of democracy were soft. And then he met the iron will of America and the nations everywhere that refused to accept the world governed by fear and force. He found himself at war with a nation led by a man whose courage would be forged in fire and steel, President Zelensky. President Putin is confronted with something today that he didn't think was possible a year ago. The democracies of the world have grown stronger, not weaker. But the autocrats of the world have grown weaker, not stronger. Because in the moments of great upheaval and uncertainty, that knowing what you stand for is most important. And knowing who stands with you makes all the difference. The people of Poland know that. You know that. In fact, you know it better than anyone here in Poland. Because that's what solidarity means. Through partition and oppression, when the beautiful city was destroyed after the Warsaw Uprising, during decades under the iron fist of communist rule, Poland endured because you stood together. That's how brave leaders of the opposition and the people of Belarus continue to fight for their democracy. That's how the resolve of Moldovan people, the resolve of the people of Moldova to live in freedom, when it gained them independence and put them on the path to EU membership. President Sandu is here today. I'm not sure where she is, but I'm proud to stand with you and the freedom-loving people of Moldova. Give her a round of applause. 1 year into this war, Putin no longer doubts the strength of our coalition, but he still doubts our conviction. He doubts our staying power. He doubts our continued support for Ukraine. He doubts whether NATO can remain unified. But there should be no doubt. Our support for Ukraine will not waver. NATO will not be divided, and we will not tire. President Putin's craven lust for land and power will fail, and the Ukrainian people's love for their country will prevail. Democracies of the world will stand guard over freedom today, tomorrow, and forever. So that's what's at stake here. Freedom. That's the message I carried to Kyiv yesterday, directly to the people of Ukraine. When President Zelensky said he came to the United States in December, quote, he said, "This struggle will define the world and what our children and grandchildren, how they live, and then their children and grandchildren." He wasn't only speaking about the children and grandchildren of Ukraine. He was speaking about all of our children and grandchildren, yours and mine. We're seeing again today what the people of Poland and the people across Europe saw for decades. Appetites of the autocrat cannot be appeased. They must be opposed. Autocrats only understand one word: no, no, no. No, you will not take my country. No, you will not take my freedom. No, you will not take my future. And I'll repeat tonight what I said last year in this same place. A dictator bent on rebuilding an empire will never be able to ease the people's love of liberty. Brutality will never grind down the will of the free. And Ukraine will never be a victory for Russia. Never. For free people refuse to live in a world of hopelessness and darkness. You know, this has been an extraordinary year in every sense. Extraordinary brutality from Russian forces and mercenaries. They've committed depravities, crimes against humanity, without shame or compunction. They've targeted civilians with death and destruction, used rape as a weapon of war, stolen Ukrainian children in an attempt to steal Ukraine's future, bombed train stations, maternity hospitals, schools, and orphanages. No one can turn away their eyes from the atrocities Russia is committing against the Ukrainian people. It's abhorrent. It's abhorrent. But extraordinarily, as well, has been the response of the Ukrainian people and the world. 1 year after the bombs began to fall, Russian tanks rolled into Ukraine. Ukraine is still independent and free. From Kherson to Kharkiv, Ukrainian fighters have reclaimed their land. More than 50% of the territory Russia held last year.
the blue and the yellow flag of Ukraine proudly waves once again. President Zelensky still leads a democratically elected government that represents the will of the Ukrainian people. And the world has already voted multiple times, including the United Nations General Assembly, to condemn Russia's aggression and support a just peace. Each time in the UN, that vote has been overwhelming. In October, 143 nations, the United Nations, condemned Russia's illegal annexation. Only four in the entire UN voted with Russia. 4. So tonight, I speak once more to the people of Russia. The United States and the nations of Europe do not seek to control or destroy Russia. The West was not plotting to attack Russia, as Putin said today. And millions of Russian citizens who only want to live in peace with their neighbors are not the enemy. This war is never a necessity. It's a tragedy. President Putin chose this war. Every day the war continues is his choice. He could end the war with a word. It's simple. If Russia stopped invading Ukraine, it would end the war. If Ukraine stopped defending itself against Russia, it would be the end of Ukraine. That's why together we're making sure Ukraine can defend itself. The United States has assembled a worldwide coalition of more than 50 nations to get critical weapons and supplies to the brave Ukrainian fighters on the front lines. Air defense systems, artillery, ammunition, tanks, armored vehicles. The European Union and its member states have stepped up with unprecedented commitment to Ukraine. Not just in security assistance, but economic and humanitarian refugee assistance and so much more. To all of you here tonight, take a moment, and I'm serious when I say this. Turn around and look at one another. Look at what you've done so far. Poland is hosting more than 1.5 million refugees from this war. God bless you. Poland's generosity, your willingness to open your hearts and your homes is extraordinary. And the American people are united in our resolve as well. All across my country, in big cities and small towns, Ukrainian flags fly from American homes. Over the past year, Democrats and Republicans in our United States Congress have come together to stand for freedom. That's who Americans are, and that's what Americans do. The world is also coming together to address the global fallout from President Putin's war. Putin tried to starve the world, blocking the ports in the Black Sea to stop Ukraine from exporting its grain, exacerbating the global food crisis that hit developing nations in Africa especially hard. Instead, the United States and the G7 and partners around the world answered the call with historic commitments to address the crisis and to bolster global food supplies. And this week, my wife, Jill Biden, is traveling to Africa to help bring attention to this critical issue. Our commitment is to the people of Ukraine and the future of Ukraine, a Ukraine that's free, sovereign, and democratic. That was the dream of those who declared Ukraine's independence more than 30 years ago.
The stress of our world can take a toll on our physical and emotional health. Here, in New York's Catskill Mountains, lies a luxurious place of healing called WION Wellness Center. The WION Wellness Center provides 500,000 square feet of natural methods to manage diabetes, hypertension, chronic pain, obesity, depression, anxiety, and other conditions. We use the traditions of centuries-old natural science from India, yoga, Ayurveda, acupuncture, and naturopathy in personalized programs that help you take charge of your own health. A minimum 5-day stay is recommended for best results. Book now at WION.com.
It's code red for humanity. The alarm bells are deafening. Wildfires, floods, and hurricanes. Extreme climate events warn of impending doom. Is the world heading towards a climate catastrophe? Watch WION's Climate Tracker weekdays at 12 p.m. GMT, 5:30 p.m. IST.
You don't know how to fix the holes in our ozone layer. You don't know how to bring the salmon back up a dead stream. You don't know how to bring back an animal now extinct. And you can't bring back the forest that once grew where there is now a desert.
You have ignored us in the past and you will ignore us again. We have run out of excuses and we are running out of time.
Show us your faithfulness. Show us your trustworthiness. Show us your honesty. Prove us wrong. We desperately need you to prove us wrong. God help us all if you fail to prove us wrong. God help us.
One trillion species. 7.8 billion humans. 1.9 million species extinct. One planet. Where are we heading? What should we do? Watch Climate Tracker, only on WION. World is one.
From the world's most volatile region, conflicts over faith and boundaries.
Democracy lifts up the human spirit and the brutal hand of the dictator who crushes it. Between nothing less than limitation and possibilities. The kind of possibilities that come when people who live not in captivity but in freedom. 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 There is no sweeter word than freedom. There is no nobler goal than freedom. There's no higher aspiration than freedom. Americans know that, and you know it. And all that we do now must be done so our children and grandchildren will know it as well. Freedom. The enemy of the tyrant and the hope of the brave and the truth of the ages. Freedom. Stand with us. We will stand with you. Let us move forward with faith and conviction and with an abiding commitment to be allies, not of darkness but of light, not of oppression but of liberation, not of captivity but, yes, of freedom. May God bless you all. May God protect our troops. And may God bless the heroes of Ukraine and all those who defend freedom around the world. Thank you, Poland. Thank you, thank you, thank you for what you're doing. God bless you all.
Does not fall, Ukraine will never be a victory for Russia. All right, let's now go across to my colleague Susan Teherani, who is in New York and has been closely tracking this story for us. No surprises there, Susan, really. The President of the United States repeatedly talking about how in this Ukraine war, freedom itself is at stake, democracy itself is at stake, and the United States and NATO allies will ensure that Kiev doesn't fall, Ukraine does not fall. A very important speech coming on the eve of the first anniversary of the Ukraine war.
Yes, very important indeed. And with no gaffes, I was thinking last year, if you remember, President Biden, when he gave his speech in Poland, he had this off-the-cuff remark where he ended his speech and said, for God's sake, this man can't stay in power. And he was referring to Putin. And the White House had to backtrack that for weeks. We didn't hear any of that this time during his speech. And we talked about this, Neha, how much he wanted to talk about democracy prevailing over autocracy, and he really pushed through regarding that. And you're absolutely right. The fact that he mentioned the word freedom so many times at the conclusion of his speech really hammered home the message that he wanted to send to the American people, because that's a word that really resonates here at home, that can't be lost in context. But also he again mentioned that there is only going to be some kind of lasting solution and peaceful solution to this conflict if Russia pulls all of its troops out of Ukraine. Well, you know, that's very idealistic at this point in time. And he also, again, mentioned that in the past year, how united NATO forces and the United States included at the helm of it have been, which has been very noteworthy nonetheless. You know, NATO has really ratcheted up its commitment to Ukraine and beyond. But, you know, as we mentioned earlier before his speech, the next year, or moving forward from the first year of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, will look very different from the first year. And so we'll have to, anticipate and wait and see, first of all, this anticipated Russia offensive that's expected to come in the spring. And then if China wants to enter the equation more than it has so far, then, how is this going to change NATO policy towards Ukraine, and whether or not Ukraine can really hold up as much as it has, and how much more support, even militarily, is the West and the United States willing to give Ukraine. And I do want to say, the United States has been very careful until now in trying to say that it's not party to this war by not providing certain military equipment to Ukraine. Well, the question now remains, when the President of the United States enters Ukrainian territory, and I don't recall another time when the United States wasn't directly involved in a conflict where the President of the United States lands in a country where there is no U.S. airspace, where, a president's plane can land, where, what kind of message does that send to Vladimir Putin? So, these are the questions that have to be answered, and these are the calculations that Putin will be making moving forward after this speech.
Right. A lot of key takeaways from that crucial address. And yes, you're right in pointing out there, Susan, that this is the first time that the U.S. president has landed in a war zone where his country is not directly involved. Let's now go across to our guest, Colonel David Desroches, joining us. He is a professor at National Defense University. Colonel Roche, thank you so much for waiting patiently as we were live on President Biden's address there. Now, the essence of that important address was this. The president says, 1 year ago, the world was bracing for the fall of Kiev. I have just come back from Kiev, and I can report Kiev stands strong, it stands proud, it stands tall, and most importantly, it stands free. Predictably, President Biden has made this all about freedom and democracy, saying freedom is at stake and we will ensure that Kiev does not fall to Moscow. How do you see this address being received in Russia, in Ukraine, and around the world? Because the timing is very significant. The president first visits Kiev and now Poland on the eve of the first anniversary of this war.
Yeah, well, I don't think it'll be favorably received in Russia, and I'm not sure if Russians will actually be able to watch it, given the total state control of the media in Russia. But it draws on a long stream of inspirational statements of determination and commitment to basic American values. If you look at both the John F. Kennedy Ich bin ein Berliner speech at the Berlin Wall, and then Ronald Reagan's speech 2 decades later, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. That's where it's at. So Putin's speech was heavy on policy. It said, we're going to withdraw from the Strategic Nuclear Weapons Treaty. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. Biden's treaty was more a statement of ambitions. It said, look, we're going to support these people because this is the right thing. So, it's in that tradition. It's sort of designed to be an inspirational speech. It's designed to signal concentration and assistance with our partners. And at the same time, it's designed to also stand out in contrast to Putin's sort of, direct, these are the specific steps we're going to take.
Right. Of course, Putin has made that very important announcement today. Predictably, he lashed out at NATO in the West, but he has decided to pull out of that important nuclear agreement. What does that mean? We don't know yet, but the NATO chief has said the world is a much more dangerous place. But let me ask you this, Colonel Roche. You said this was designed to be an inspirational speech, but my colleague Susan has been reporting, and many other American guests that we've had on our shows in recent days have pointed out that there seems to be dwindling support in the United States for the country's support to Ukraine. We know President Biden wants to run for the White House again in 2024. How is this likely to play out domestically for President Biden? And also, as Susan very rightly pointed out, how much more support financially and militarily you really think NATO countries are in a position to continue providing to Kiev, given that the war is about to enter year 2?
Yeah, let me start backwards from that list and work my way forwards. So the military support that the Allies can find is a lot less than it was because, quite frankly, at the start of the war, a lot of countries that had former Soviet bloc hardware, Poland, Romania, Ukraine, Czech Republic, they were able to send that to Ukraine at almost no cost to themselves because it was warehoused. Then as the war went on, what we started to see was Western countries providing equipment like 155 millimeter howitzers, HIMARS, and cutting into Western stocks. Well, now a lot of our NATO allies, Germany, France, Britain, are finding that their stocks are dangerously low, and the United States stocks are low of key support supplies as well. So what we're having to do is scour the earth to provide, like Korean rounds for 155 millimeter howitzers. So that is hard. That is a problem that has to be addressed. The United States has stepped up its defense industrial production, and our European allies need to do the same. The next point you raised was fiscal support. That will continue. Money is something that everybody wants, and there's always a use for money, but it's something that the West has, and it's a relative advantage compared with Russia. So I think that will continue. That's much easier to get because there's not much of an opportunity cost for it. The next question you raised was about domestic support in the United States for the Ukraine war. And it is declining from where it was, but it still remains relatively high, and it still remains bipartisan. I think if you disaggregate the question of support, I think that you'll find that there's a couple of questions at play there. The first is President Biden has generally spoken of it as a national event, but some of his party members have tried to say, well, this is something that our party has taken on, and that alienates part of the United States. The second issue is, while we are supporting this war, the costs of supporting it are starting to become apparent. So it is clear that we're dipping into our stockpiles at levels that may be dangerously low. And there's also the issue of the fact that there doesn't seem to be an American strategy to really move forward. The strategy is to give the Ukrainians a bunch of weapons and trust the Ukrainians to use them in the best way. And I think that in the short term, that's the only strategy we could have had. But I think that, Americans don't like to sustain wars. They like to win wars, even though we don't do it as often as we should. And I think that what you'll find is people will start to say, look, we're getting into our war reserves. What is the plan for victory, and start to say, should we be doing something else? Should we perhaps launch attacks on other areas? Should we, facilitate the provision of advanced weaponry to the Ukrainians? Then your first point that you made was about the withdrawal from the nuclear treaty. That does make the world a more dangerous place. But it's important to put this in the context of Putin's overall comparative advantages. The Russian army has been exposed as a much, much worse army than we thought. Russia still remains a premier first-rate nuclear power. And Putin, from the beginning, has reminded the West of Russia's nuclear capability and has at times threatened to escalate and use nuclear weapons. I think he's doing this as a way of deterring the West from providing true advanced weaponry, providing weapons and allowing the Ukrainians to retaliate inside Russia against Russian infrastructure the way Russia has done that. So I hope I got all of those. And I'm sorry for going backwards, but I that's how my mind works.
We truly appreciate the comprehensive answer that you have given to that rather complex question. It has many dimensions to it. We appreciate that, Colonel Roche. Please stay on with us. We'll come back to you in just a moment. My colleague Susan Teherani is still with us from New York. I'm also now joined by Anas Malik from the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, where President Joe Biden was just yesterday, reassuring President Zelensky of America's continued and uninterrupted support to Ukraine for as long as it takes. Anas, an important speech made by President Biden yesterday an equally important speech made by him today in Warsaw, where he has talked about how freedom and democracy are at stake, and the US and NATO will ensure that Ukraine never falls to Russia. How is this speech being received in Kiev?
Well, it's a bit too early to say that how it is being received, but how it will be received, because reactions are yet to come in. President Biden has literally just ended his speech, but the fact that he made quite high references and high notes on the Ukrainian bit, on the fact that how his reassurance or commitment to Ukraine would continue, how thankful he was to Poland to continue assistance with Ukraine, that is something I think that would be largely welcomed by the people of Ukraine by and large over here, and that is something that we would see that that would be that punchline. But one thing I think that probably has had a miss was when towards the end, when President Biden was making that mention of Ukraine of hosting the NATO allies next year and marking the 75th year, where it skipped the mention, or it was a deliberate miss, where he could have probably mentioned as a guest invite to President Zelensky. I think that would be seen as a moment of disappointment for Kyiv, but then again it is too early to judge on that. Kyiv would also be rejoicing for the fact that the President of the United States has reinforced the fact that they will be holding Russia accountable for the crimes against humanity that they have been committing here in Ukraine for the past 1 year. Kyiv would also be rejoicing for the fact that President Biden has made it clear to President Putin that there is no war and the war is to end. There is no war that is being waged from Ukrainian side. The Ukrainian side is defending itself. The moment Russian side stands down is the moment this war will come to an end. So lots of key takeaways or high notes, at least for Kyiv, and Kyiv would want to rejoice on them with this speech, at least. Neha?
Certainly a lot of key takeaways for both Kiev and Moscow, and the president there making it clear that that America will not let Ukraine become a casualty. But we have to remember that it's been almost a year since this war erupted. It has gone on for far too long now. Everybody claims they want peace, but nobody is showing any willingness to return to the negotiating table. Just how much longer will this war go on for is itself a million-dollar question. But on that note, Susan Tehrani, Anas Malik and Colonel Roche, thank you so much for speaking to WION and sharing all those important details with us. Well, it will be a year on Friday since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Peace remains a far cry, with continuous signals that the canvas of this war is expanding dangerously by the day. Speaking to European Union's ambassador to India, Ugo Astuto, and Ukrainian envoy Ivan Konoval, here's my colleague Siddhant Sibul on the latest situation in Ukraine, the support from India and more. Listen in.
This week marks the 1 year since the conflict in Europe started. With me are two important diplomats, the top diplomat of European Union and Ukraine here in Delhi, ambassador of EU and the CDA of Ukraine. Welcome to WION. My first question to you, starting with you, sir, is that how do you see the situation changing in terms of the security challenges for Europe since the conflict that started last year? How has it been a worry for European capitals?
Well, as you say, unfortunately, we are about to mark a very sad anniversary. 1 year of conflict, 1 year of aggression from Russia towards its peaceful neighbor. It's a major concern, this return of war in Europe, and it's a major concern to see a blatant violation of the UN Charter by a very member of the UN Security Council. What we have tried to do as European Union is to react to this affront, to this challenge against the rules-based system of international governance by supporting Ukraine, isolating Russia politically and sanctioning Russia in economic terms in order to make it difficult for the Russian leadership to continue this war of aggression. And making those responsible for the aggression accountable as well. That has been the purpose of a repeated series of sanctions. We are about to discuss the 10th package of sanctions. In parallel, we have been trying to support Ukraine as much as we could in political and economic terms, but also militarily in providing supplies, weapon supplies. It's actually the first time in the history of the European Union that the European Union has also supplied weapons through its budget. It's the first time, and it's a reflection of how extraordinary the situation is. And such an extraordinary situation warrants extraordinary measures.
So do you see or do you think that there will be increased conflict or actions by the Russians ahead of the anniversary, which will be marked on Friday? Do you see they're bombing Ukrainian cities?
We have the Russian missiles, bombardment, shelling, it's every day. And also it is a countless amount of missiles which have been sent to our territory. And we are living, actually, this is a nowadays, this is a style of life, when people are living under the air alarm. And definitely, we are expecting every day the air missile attack, and we are ready. In this case, we requested our partners to provide us with more air defense system to be on the more safe side. And definitely European Union, US and our partners are doing their best to provide us with the support.
And how do you see the visit of the American President Joe Biden? It was a surprise visit, and a visit that has been an international headline for the last 24 hours. So,
I think it is. I think it's additional evidence of the determination and unity of the United States and Europe and the allies and partners in supporting Ukraine. We stand by Ukraine.
On resolution of the conflict, what kind of engagement you have had with the Indian side?
We are in regular contacts, high-level contacts. We are discussing, we are informing Indian side what is going on regarding the situation in our country. Definitely, we are receiving the humanitarian aid from the Indian government and from the private business of India. We are very much thankful.
Well, that's a wrap on the show. Thanks for watching, but stay tuned to WION World is One.
WION.
The stress of our world can take a toll on our physical and emotional health. Here, in New York's Catskill Mountains, lies a luxurious place of healing called WION Wellness Center. The WION Wellness Center provides 500,000 square feet of natural methods to manage diabetes, hypertension, chronic pain, obesity, depression, anxiety, and other conditions. We use the traditions of centuries-old natural science from India, yoga, Ayurveda, acupuncture, and naturopathy in personalized programs that help you take charge of your own health. A minimum 5-day stay is recommended for best results. Book now at yo1.com.
It's code red for humanity. The alarm bells are deafening. Wildfires, floods, and hurricanes. Extreme climate events warn of impending doom. Is the world heading towards a climate catastrophe? Watch WION's Climate Tracker Weekdays at 12 p.m. GMT, 5:30 p.m. IST.
You don't know how to fix the holes in our ozone layer. You don't know how to bring the salmon back up a dead stream. You don't know how to bring back an animal now extinct. And you can't bring back the forest that once grew where there is now a desert.
You have ignored us in the past and you will ignore us again. We have run out of excuses and we are running out of time.
Show us your faithfulness. Show us your trustworthiness. Show us your honesty. Prove us wrong. We desperately need you to prove us wrong. God help us all if you fail to prove us wrong. God help us.
One trillion species, 7.8 billion humans, 1.9 million species extinct. One planet. Where are we heading? What should we do? Watch Climate Tracker, only on WION. World is One.
From the world's most volatile region, conflicts over faith and boundaries. Stories of death, destruction, despair, and hope. WION brings you to the heart of the action. Incisive analysis, unrivaled perspective, and exclusive ground reports. Watch West Asia Post every Friday, 8:30 p.m. IST with me, Radi Francis. Only on WION. World is One.
Stay connected with the world through WION. Like the page on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter for new alerts. Instagram for videos and images. And the website for the latest news, views, and analysis. WIONews.com. World is One.
This week, the African Union, then the Organization of African Unity or OAU, marks 60 years since its formation. Has it been able to address the issues of the continent? And is it a stronger grouping right now, or does it need more improvement? And what do Africans feel about the grouping's power and strength? Is it still relevant? We will try and answer those questions on World of Africa with me, Eric Njoka. Welcome to the program. Now, African leaders met in the Ethiopian capital Addis Ababa for the annual summit aimed at accelerating implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Now, the creation of the African Union, or the AU, began with a wave of optimism about the continent's future. The organization now says peace and security have become more worrying than ever, and it's working to address the issue. Climate change, poverty, the outbreak of disease, and food shortages are all big issues. So, will the African Union be able to address these issues, and has the grouping lost its grip on the continent? Let's find out in this World